So recently, I finished playing Call of Duty 2 on the Xbox 360. Overall, I enjoyed my time with Call of Duty 2. I wasn't expecting a whole lot going into it because I know it's an early entry in the game's history, so I wasn't really expecting a lot of the bells and whistles that would come in the later entries like Modern Warfare and the Black Ops series. But overall, I did enjoy my time with Call of Duty 2. The levels are pretty neat. I will say right off the bat, I'm a bit of a World War II buff, so I always enjoy the Call of Duties that take that time period over the future warfare or even Modern Warfare. I do enjoy Modern Warfare, but the World War II ones are generally my favorite setting for a war game of this type. So the levels they had in the game were all really cool. They were fun to explore and move through. They were well designed, a lot of different buildings to go through and clear, a lot of different fields. They all, for the most part, looked pretty different and they're unique in their own little ways. Whether it was scaling a wall at Point du Hoc to get up onto the ledge where the bunkers were, or going through fields in France, the deserts of Africa and Tunisia, those were all really fun to play through. The frame rate was surprisingly good for an older Call of Duty. Usually these games can have some spotty frame rate at the beginning, and I'm sure if you play Call of Duty 2 on the PS2 or the original Xbox, which I believe they're also available for, you probably will run into some lesser frame rate, but the Xbox 360 version ran pretty well throughout the entire experience. It only dropped frames a couple times when there was some big explosions or something of that nature going on. I'm not really sure if this is a positive or not, but something that I wanted to note was that it's impressive how consistent Call of Duty 2 feels alongside the later entries in the series. This game fit right alongside the games that I started with, which were Call of Duty 4 and Modern Warfare 2, Black Ops, that sort of era of Call of Duty. The game basically felt right at home with those, so I think it's impressive that they were able to design a game that they would continue to use as a basis for years to come. It's just surprising how much they got to feel right from pretty early on in the series' history. I really liked how they used pictures and filmed segments of actual war footage from the military channel. I always like when games do that, especially in the World War II setting, because it's nice to see the actual represented footage of what events actually happened that the game designers are recreating for the video game. So I really enjoyed seeing those play out before each of the different campaigns in the game, of which there is a Soviet campaign, a British campaign, and an American campaign. So you get a bunch of different stories from the different parts of the Allied forces. And just in general, the art design and the style of the game is really cool. They nailed a pretty consistent tone, and it looks nice despite it being an older launch title for the Xbox 360. It doesn't look that terrible. So yeah, I really like the art style in Call of Duty 2. Now for some of the cons that I had with the game, the sound effects for one thing. Basically what I'll say about the sound effects are that they're really loud, which I guess is a good thing for a Call of Duty game, or for a war game in general. You want nice weapon sound effects and everything, but oftentimes there's a lot of chaotic exchanges happening, explosions going off, multiple guns going off at the same time. And it seems like they didn't really balance the audio right, because it gets very loud. I wasn't even playing the game with headphones, but multiple times throughout the game I got headaches from just all the stuff that was happening on screen and all the sound effects that were going off. So I think they weren't that great balance-wise. They're pretty varied, but it too loud, definitely. Also, this isn't really a knock on Call of Duty 2, but there was a lot of sound effects that I recognized from later games, so it's kind of funny that they just took out similar audio dialogue lines and weapon sound effects and just shipped them up the later games. That's more of a knock on the future of the game series, but just something interesting I noticed. The checkpoints and hit detection on enemies leave a little to be desired. The checkpoints sometimes would load you like right before a death or right when a vehicle or a rocket flies by, so you constantly are reloading and dying almost immediately. That's never a good sign with checkpoints. And the hit detection, most notably with rifles and sniper rifles, sometimes I would be aiming right at enemies and I would fire and a shot would just miss, even though my crosshair was clearly on them. Whether that's due to the old nature of the game or not, if you're aiming right on an enemy, you should be able to hit them. Compared to the rest of the game, the UI actually looks really dated to me. The little compass and some of the text on the screen, it looks really low res compared to everything else. And also some of the in-between mission screens where they have like, I don't know if they're photographs or if there's some sort of rendering of the things, they just look kind of bad compared to the rest of the game. As I mentioned earlier with the sound effects, the weapon variety is pretty decent. You actually get a bunch of different types of guns, but the main problem with it is that there's not a lot of ammo for these different types of guns. So for example, if you're an American, you'll spawn in with an M1 Garand and a Thompson. You might only have enough ammo for a couple mags worth of fire, and then you're going to have to pick something up. And basically all the enemies have MP40s, so I found myself constantly having to use an MP40 for a lot of the game. Kind of disappointing. If I wanted to try something else, I would just run out of ammo too quickly. Variety is decent in theory, but you're often pigeonholed into taking whatever you can find. And the biggest issue I have with this game is actually a bug that I encountered, and I had to look this up online. Basically, after a certain point in the game where you go through a tank mission in Tunisia, the game's save data gets like corrupted somehow. Basically how it showed it on my screen was that it said that I was signed in on another console and then it would revert my save all the way back to the first chapter of the game. I looked this up and apparently it was a known bug, but I guess they just never patched it because it obviously still happened in my game. Luckily, there is a cheat code that if you're on the mission select screen, you can hold LB-RB and do left, left, right, right, Y, Y, the left and right on the D-pad. If you do that, it'll unlock all the missions in the mission list, so you can still play the game despite this glitch, but it's really disappointing that something fairly game-breaking could be left in the game unpatched for so long. I mean, they're obviously not going to go back and patch it now, but it's just kind of interesting that they never really got around to fixing it. So yeah, should you play Call of Duty 2? I'd say if you're a fan of Call of Duty and you like World War II shooters, you won't have that big of a problem playing this game. It was a fun time. It was roughly about 8 hours, and it felt like the perfect amount of time. The levels are all really neat. You go through a lot of different campaigns and a lot of different set pieces. Things you would come to expect from later Call of Duty games are in Call of Duty 2. So if you enjoy that sort of gameplay, you'll be right at home with Call of Duty 2.